The black horse sent 6 grown ranchers running before sunrise, yet the only person it allowed near its face was a widow everybody in town had forgotten. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if you still believe kindness can calm things fear never could, hit like and follow. Now, back to the story. The first time the horse appeared, people thought it belonged to some drifting cattle crew passing through Dry Creek Valley. A massive black stallion with a coat dark as burned wood and eyes that reflected lantern light like polished glass. But by the third night, nobody was calling it beautiful anymore. Fence posts snapped across 3 ranches' water barrels overturned. Horses panicked so badly one rancher said his entire stable sounded like thunder trapped inside a barn. Then came the stories. Cole Braddock swore the animal charged him from the dust near Hollow Ridge and nearly sent him tumbling into a cactus ditch. Another ranch hand claimed the stallion stood in the middle of the road during a lightning storm without moving an inch while rain rolled off its back like oil. Men started calling it the devil horse before the week was over. Out in Dry Creek, names like that spread faster than wildfire through dead grass. The sheriff wanted it captured. The ranchers wanted it gone. But nobody could get close enough to throw a rope around its neck. Every attempt ended the same way. Dust flying, horses screaming, men stumbling backward with fear written all over their faces. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the black stallion always escaped untouched. Some folks claimed it wasn't normal. Said no wild horse moved that fast. Said it watched people too carefully, like it understood them. By the 7th day, children were being called inside before sunset. Saloon conversations stopped whenever somebody mentioned seeing hoofprints near town. Even the old-timers who survived blizzards, droughts, and cattle wars lowered their voices when talking about the animal. But there was one person in Dry Creek who never joined those conversations. Evelyn Carter lived alone nearly 2 miles north of town in a weathered cabin beside a narrow canyon road. Most people barely remembered she was there anymore. Her husband died 10 years earlier during a wagon accident involving frightened horses, and since then, Evelyn stopped coming to church socials, stopped visiting the market unless absolutely necessary, and stopped speaking more than a sentence at a time. She carried herself quietly, like somebody trying not to disturb old memories sleeping beneath the dust. Every morning, she hung laundry beside the cabin. Every evening, she lit the same oil lamp near her window before sundown. And every night, the valley wind pushed against her porch like something searching for a way inside. Then one stormy evening, just as thunder rolled over the canyon walls and rain began tapping against her roof, Evelyn heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow. Heavy. Circling her cabin in the dark. The sound did not move away. It circled the cabin slowly like something deciding whether to trust the light inside. Evelyn Carter sat frozen beside the oil lamp while rain tapped against the windows in uneven rhythms. Outside, thunder rolled low across Dry Creek Valley, shaking the loose boards beneath her boots. Most people would have bolted the door tighter. Most people in town already feared what walked on 4 legs through those hills after dark. But Evelyn had spent 10 years learning what fear sounded like. And this was not rage. This sounded tired. Another hoofbeat scraped across the mud near her porch. Heavy, dragging slightly. She reached for the lantern hanging beside the door, then stopped halfway. Her fingers trembled against the cold metal handle. For a moment, she saw her husband again. Thomas Carter laughing atop a wagon seat under summer sun. Then came the memory she never escaped. Horses screaming. Wheels breaking loose on canyon rock. Dust swallowing everything before silence took his voice forever. Evelyn closed her eyes hard enough to hurt. Outside, the animal let out a low breath that drifted through the storm like smoke. Not angry. Hurt. She stood before she could change her mind. The old floorboards groaned softly beneath her weight as she crossed the cabin. Wind rushed inside the second she opened the door. Rain soaked her sleeves. Almost instantly. And there it stood. The black stallion looked even larger up close, nearly 17 hands tall, with rain sliding down its dark coat in silver streaks beneath the lantern glow. Mud clung to its legs. Steam rose from its body into the freezing night air. The horse stared directly at her, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Then Evelyn saw the blood near its front leg. A long piece of twisted metal was lodged just above the hoof, likely from old fencing wire hidden beneath the brush. The animal shifted slightly, favoring the injured leg. Most creatures in pain become dangerous. Evelyn knew that better than anyone. She should have stepped back inside. She should have barred the door and waited for morning. Instead, she lowered the lantern slowly and whispered the same words she used to calm frightened horses years ago. Easy now. Nobody is hurting you tonight. The stallion's ears twitched forward. Rain dripped from its mane onto the porch steps between them. Somewhere far off in the valley, coyotes cried beneath the storm clouds. Evelyn took one careful step closer. The horse instantly jerked its head upward, muscles tightening beneath its soaked coat. One wrong movement, and the entire moment would shatter. But Evelyn did not run. She stood perfectly still in the rain while the lantern flickered gold across her weathered face. The stallion stared at her for what felt like forever. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, it lowered its head again. Evelyn swallowed hard. Her heartbeat felt louder than thunder now. She reached toward the wounded leg with shaking fingers, stopping inches away from the twisted metal buried in flesh. The horse flinched but did not move away. And for the first time in 10 years, Evelyn Carter touched a horse again. The rain stopped just before midnight, but Evelyn Carter remained kneeling beside the stallion long after the storm passed over the valley. Her lantern burned low now, throwing weak amber light across the soaked porch while cold wind carried the smell of wet cedar and distant sagebrush through the canyon. The horse stood perfectly still beside her, though every few seconds its muscles tightened. Beneath the dark coat as pain traveled through the injured leg, Evelyn could feel it. Animals always told the truth through their eyes. People lied. Horses did not. Slowly, carefully, she wrapped one hand around the twisted piece of metal lodged above the hoof. The stallion jerked slightly at her touch, breath steaming hard through its nostrils. Easy, she whispered again, softer this time. You survived this long. You can survive one more minute. Her own voice surprised her. It sounded steadier than she felt. 10 years had passed since she last stood this close to a horse. 10 years since she swore she never would again. Yet somehow, beneath the fading lantern light and dripping rainwater, fear no longer sat alone inside her chest. Something else had arrived beside it. Recognition. The stallion lowered its massive head slightly until Evelyn could see the small scar running along its jawline beneath the wet mane. Old scars. Old pain. She understood both. Taking a slow breath, she pulled the metal free in one clean motion. The horse instantly reared back half a step, hooves striking mud beside the porch hard enough to shake the loose boards beneath her knees. Evelyn froze. The lantern flame trembled wildly between them. One wrong move now, and everything would collapse into panic again. But the stallion did not run. It simply stood there breathing heavily while rainwater dripped from its mane in steady silver lines. Then something strange happened. The horse looked directly at her and lowered its head until its forehead rested gently against her shoulder. Evelyn stopped breathing for a second. Warmth spread through her coat where the animal leaned against her, enormous and trembling beneath the cold night air. She could hear every slow breath it took, could smell wet earth and leather and storm water clinging to its coat. Tears stung her eyes before she realized they were there. Not because she was afraid, because she remembered what trust felt like. Somewhere far down in Dry Creek Valley, a church bell rang midnight through the darkness. Evelyn blinked hard and stepped back carefully. You cannot stay here, she whispered, though part of her already knew the horse had nowhere else left to go. She disappeared briefly inside the cabin and returned carrying an old wool blanket once belonging to Thomas. The same faded brown blanket folded untouched at the bottom of her chest for nearly a decade. She hesitated before placing it across the stallion's back. The horse did not resist. Its dark eyes followed her every movement beneath the weak lantern glow. You sure picked the wrong widow tonight, she muttered quietly. For the first time in years, a faint smile touched her face. Then the wind shifted. Hoofbeats echoed faintly somewhere down the canyon road. Human riders. Evelyn's expression changed instantly. The stallion heard them too. Its ears snapped forward sharply toward the darkness beyond the trees while tension rolled through its entire body like a gathering storm. The riders came fast enough to shake loose dust from Evelyn Carter's porch roof. 3 lanterns cut through the darkness below the canyon, while tired horses pushed hard against the muddy trail leading toward her cabin. The black stallion instantly pulled away from her shoulder and turned toward the sound with its neck raised high, every muscle beneath the blanket tightening like drawn wire. Evelyn watched the change happen in seconds. Fear, not anger. Fear. The animal backed toward the trees bordering the cabin, breathing harder now, ears pinned toward the approaching hoofbeats. No, Evelyn whispered softly. Do not run hurt. The stallion hesitated. Rainwater still dripped from the pines overhead, while distant thunder rolled farther east beyond the valley. Then came a familiar voice echoing up the canyon road. Tracks lead this way. Cole Braddock. Evelyn's stomach tightened immediately. Cole owned the largest cattle spread in Dry Creek Valley and carried himself like the territory belonged to him personally. He hated problems he could not control. And for the last week, the black stallion had become exactly that. Lantern light finally reached the edge of Evelyn's property. 3 riders emerged through the darkness wearing long dust coats soaked from the storm. Cole rode in front atop a chestnut horse lathered with sweat. Beside him came Deputy Harris, and another ranch hand holding a coiled rope already prepared. They looked tired, irritated, the kind of men who had spent too many nights chasing something they no longer understood. Miss Carter, Cole called sharply once he spotted the cabin light. You awake in there? Evelyn slowly lowered the lantern beside the porch rail. The stallion disappeared deeper into the shadows near the trees, almost invisible except for the faint shine of rain across its coat. It is after midnight, Cole, she answered calmly. Most decent folks would wait until morning. Cole dismounted heavily into the mud and removed his hat, rain dripping from the brim. Decent folks are losing livestock and sleep because of that cursed animal. His eyes scanned the property carefully. We tracked fresh prints right up this canyon. Evelyn crossed her arms against the cold wind. Then maybe your trackers need better lanterns. Deputy Harris shifted awkwardly in the saddle behind him. The younger man looked exhausted more than angry. Ma'am, he said carefully, folks are scared. Nobody has seen a horse act like this before. Evelyn almost answered immediately. Then she remembered the warmth of the stallion's forehead against her shoulder only minutes earlier. Creatures in pain rarely behave the way people expected. Maybe folks stopped listening before the animal stopped trusting, she said quietly. Cole gave a dry laugh under his breath. That thing nearly tore through my north fence tonight. And yet it came here instead of running farther into the hills. Cole narrowed his eyes at her. The wind carried silence between them for a long moment, while rainwater dripped steadily from the cabin roof. Then something moved behind Evelyn near the tree line. Barely a shift of shadow. But Cole saw it instantly. His entire posture changed. There, he snapped. I knew it. Before Evelyn could react, the ranch hand beside Deputy Harris tossed the rope toward the darkness. The stallion exploded from the trees in a blur of black muscle and flying mud, stopping all 3 horses cold with one thunderous cry that echoed across the canyon walls. Cole's mount nearly bucked sideways beneath him. Lantern. Light swung wildly through the storm-dark night while the stallion stood 20 feet away, breathing hard, eyes bright as fire beneath the dripping mane. But instead of charging, the animal did something stranger. It stepped sideways behind Evelyn Carter like it trusted her to stand between it and the rest of the world. Nobody in Dry Creek had ever seen the animal stand quietly behind a human being before. The stallion's chest rose and fell beside Evelyn Carter, while rainwater slid from its dark mane onto the muddy ground near her boots. Cole Braddock stared at the scene without blinking, lantern light flickering across his weathered face. For the first time since the horse appeared in the valley, uncertainty replaced anger in his eyes. Move away from it, he said carefully. That thing is dangerous. Evelyn did not move. Dangerous things usually do not hide behind people, she answered softly. Deputy Harris slowly climbed down from his saddle, boots sinking into wet earth. The younger man looked more curious now than afraid. Miss Carter, he said quietly, how close have you been to it? Evelyn glanced toward the stallion beside her. The horse lowered its head slightly near her shoulder again, steam rising from its body into the cold canyon air, close enough to remove fencing wire from its leg. Silence fell instantly. Even the wind seemed to pause between the trees. Cole looked stunned. You touched it. Somebody had to. The ranch hand holding the rope muttered something under his breath and stepped backward toward the horses. Fear spread quickly in small towns. But so did superstition. Cole narrowed his eyes toward the stallion again. No horse acts this way without reason. Evelyn almost answered immediately. Then she noticed something strange near the horse's neck beneath the soaked blanket. A faded mark burned into the skin under the mane. Not fresh. Old. She slowly lifted the lantern higher. The stallion shifted uneasily but remained beside her. Cole stepped closer carefully, boots crunching wet gravel. "What is that?" he asked. Evelyn brushed damp strands of mane aside with trembling fingers. The mark underneath looked weathered by years and scar. Tissue, but the shape still remained visible beneath the lantern glow. A ranch brand. Deputy Harris inhaled sharply. "I know that symbol." Cole looked at him. "From where?" The deputy swallowed hard before answering. "Old Mercer Trading Company." Evelyn's heartbeat slowed instantly. She knew that name. Everybody over 40 in Dry Creek knew it. Mercer wagons once hauled supplies through nearly every canyon trail in the territory before the company disappeared after a disastrous accident years ago. "That cannot be right," Cole muttered. "Mercer shut down almost a decade ago." But Evelyn barely heard him anymore. Her eyes stayed fixed on the scarred brand beneath the horse's mane, while old memories rose slowly through the dark corners of her mind. A broken wagon wheel near Canyon Rock. Men shouting in panic. Horses terrified by thunder and loose chains. And Thomas standing in heavy dust trying to calm them before everything went wrong. Evelyn suddenly stepped backward as if the memory itself touched her skin. The stallion immediately turned toward her again, watching her carefully. Deputy Harris lowered his voice. "Miss Carter, your husband worked one of those wagon routes, did he not?" She nodded once without looking away from the horse. The night air felt colder now. Much colder. Cole removed his hat slowly, rain dripping from the brim beside his hand. "You think this animal came from that old convoy?" he asked. "No," Evelyn whispered. "I think this animal survived it." Nobody spoke after that. The lantern flame crackled softly while canyon wind moved through the pines overhead. Then the stallion took one slow step closer to Evelyn and lowered its head until its scarred neck rested gently against her shoulder again. Like it remembered her too. The storm finally drifted east before dawn, leaving Dry Creek Valley wrapped in cold silver fog and dripping pine branches. Cole Braddock and the others rode away just before sunrise without another word, though none of them looked comfortable turning their backs on the animal standing beside Evelyn Carter's porch. Deputy Harris glanced over his shoulder 3 separate times before disappearing down the canyon trail. Only the sound of fading hoofbeats remained behind. Then silence returned to the cabin. Real silence. The kind Evelyn had lived with for 10 long years. She stood on the porch holding the lantern long after the riders vanished from sight. The stallion remained nearby beneath the trees, watching her carefully through the morning mist. Not wild now. Not calm either. Waiting. Evelyn slowly sat down in the old wooden chair beside the cabin door, pulling her coat tighter against the cold air. Her hands still trembled slightly from everything that happened during the night. Rainwater dripped from the roof in slow, steady rhythms beside her boots. Somewhere beyond the hills, a hawk cried across the pale morning sky. The horse finally stepped closer again, limping only slightly now that the twisted metal was gone. Evelyn noticed the difference immediately. "You hide pain well," she murmured. The stallion stopped 6 feet away and lowered its head toward the porch boards where the scent of lantern oil and wet cedar lingered in the air. Evelyn studied the scarred brand on its neck again. Mercer Trading Company. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. Yet now old memories drifted back clearer than they had in a decade. Thomas laughing beside a campfire after long wagon runs. Dusty supply routes cutting through canyon roads. Horses nervous before storms rolled in from the mountains. Then came the final trip, the one nobody in Dry Creek liked talking about afterward. A wagon overturned near Blackstone Pass during heavy rain. Most blamed the frightened horses. Others blamed the narrow trail. Evelyn only remembered arriving too late to say goodbye. She rubbed her palms together slowly against the cold. "Were you there?" she whispered without thinking. The stallion flicked one ear toward her voice. Evelyn gave a faint, tired smile at herself. "Listen to me," she muttered softly. Talking to horses again after all these years. But deep down, something unsettled her. The animal did not behave like a creature seeing her for the first time. Every movement carried strange familiarity, like recognition buried beneath instinct and memory. Then the stallion suddenly lifted its head toward the valley below. Its entire posture sharpened instantly. Evelyn heard it seconds later. Bells. Church bells ringing fast from Dry Creek Town Center. Not Sunday bells. Warning bells. Her expression tightened immediately. Those bells only rang when fire, flood, or livestock trouble threatened the valley. The stallion turned fully toward the distant sound, while cold morning wind moved through its dark mane. Evelyn slowly stood from the porch chair, feeling unease settle deep inside her chest. Then came another sound drifting faintly through the fog. Men shouting somewhere far below. Horses screaming in panic. The stallion stamped once against the muddy ground, breathing harder now. Evelyn looked toward the valley road disappearing through the mist beneath her cabin hill. Something was wrong in Dry Creek. Very wrong. And somehow, before anybody else arrived to explain it, the horse already seemed to know. By the time Evelyn Carter reached the edge of Dry Creek, smoke already hung above the valley like a dark storm cloud trapped beneath the morning sun. Townsfolk crowded the muddy main street in silence while frightened horses stomped nervously beside water troughs overflowing onto the dirt. Somewhere near the grain storage sheds, men shouted orders over each other, but nobody sounded certain anymore. Evelyn slowed beside the church steps, her boots damp from the long walk down the canyon trail. The stallion had followed her the entire way. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to disappear. Every few minutes, she caught glimpses of the dark animal moving silently between cottonwood trees or standing motionless along distant fence lines watching the town below. And somehow, nobody else seemed to notice. Miss Carter. Deputy Harris hurried toward her through the crowd, breathing hard beneath his dust coat. Thank God you came. Evelyn glanced past him toward the smoke drifting across the street. What happened? Harris lowered his voice. Fire started at the South Hay Barns before sunrise. Spread fast through the dry grass. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold morning air. Could have taken half the valley if the wind shifted another mile north. Evelyn studied the smoke carefully. Something about it felt wrong. Not large enough for a wildfire. Too controlled. Then she noticed the horses tied near the sheriff's office, trembling violently against their reins. Every single one faced south, toward the open grazing fields beyond town. Listening. Where is Cole? She asked quietly. Harris pointed toward the edge of town, where several ranchers stood arguing near the road leading into the plains. Cole Braddock looked furious, hat shoved low over his brow, while he barked instructions nobody seemed eager to follow. Cattle scattered during the fire, Harris explained. Whole herd broke through the south fences. Evelyn's stomach tightened immediately. Thousands of acres stretched beyond those plains. Ravines, sinkholes, dry riverbeds hidden beneath tall grass. If frightened cattle stampeded too far south, ranchers could lose half the season's livestock before nightfall. How many? She asked. Harris swallowed. Close to 200 head. Evelyn looked past the town toward the open fields shimmering beneath pale morning sun. Then she heard it. Distant thunder rolling across the plains. Not weather. Hoofbeats. The sound grew louder by the second, until even the townsfolk fell silent listening to it. Cole turned sharply toward the southern road. Dust rose beyond the hills in massive swirling clouds moving fast toward Dry Creek. Several women pulled children closer beside the church. Horses tied near storefronts jerked nervously against their reins. Then the first cattle appeared through the dust. Running hard. Dozens of them. Eyes wild. Panic moving through the herd like electricity. Ranchers scrambled instantly, shouting for ropes and gates. They are going to tear straight through town, Harris muttered under his breath. But before the herd reached the first buildings, another shape burst from the dust behind them. Black as midnight beneath the rising sun. The stallion. It moved beside the herd with terrifying speed, cutting sharply across the cattle line with precise movements that looked almost practiced. Every time the herd veered toward town, the stallion pushed them back toward the open fields. Again, without touching a single animal. Evelyn stared in disbelief while dust rolled across the valley floor like smoke. The black horse was not chasing the herd. It was protecting the town from it. And somewhere beneath the thunder of hundreds of hooves, Evelyn suddenly remembered something Thomas once told her beside a campfire long ago. The smartest horses do not run from fear, he said. They run ahead of it. The entire valley watched in stunned silence as the black stallion turned nearly 200 terrified cattle away from Dry Creek's main street without a single rider beside it. Dust rolled through town thick as smoke while hooves thundered across the plains beyond the church and general store. The animal moved like flowing shadow against the morning sun, cutting sharply across the herd whenever panic pushed the cattle toward buildings or fences. Ranchers stood frozen beside their horses, ropes hanging useless in their hands. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Cole Braddock stepped into the middle of the muddy street slowly, eyes locked on the stallion in disbelief. "That is impossible," he muttered beneath his breath. But Evelyn Carter barely heard him. She watched the horse move across the plains and suddenly remembered something else from long ago. Thomas used to say good trail horses could sense danger before men ever noticed it. Storms, flash floods, broken ground beneath tall grass. Smart horses survived because they paid attention to the land when humans stopped listening. Then Evelyn noticed where the stallion kept turning the herd away from. The southern ridge. Her expression changed instantly. "Cole," she said sharply. "How close did the cattle get to Raven Wash?" Cole looked toward her. "Too close probably." "What?" Evelyn's stomach tightened hard. Raven Wash looked harmless during dry months. Just another stretch of cracked earth and weeds beyond the plains. But beneath the surface ran deep sinkholes carved by old floodwater. One wrong stampede through there could swallow livestock whole before anybody realized what happened. "The horse is steering them away from the wash," she whispered. Deputy Harris turned pale beside her. "Dear God." Suddenly the stallion cut hard across the front of the herd again, forcing the cattle west towards safer grazing land near the foothills. Several ranchers immediately mounted up and rode after them, finally understanding what the animal had been trying to do all along. Dust swallowed the plains while shouts echoed faintly beneath the thunder of hooves. But the black stallion never joined the riders. It stayed separate from them, watching, guiding, keeping distance like it still expected betrayal if anyone got too close. Evelyn felt something heavy shift quietly inside her chest as she watched the animal disappear through the dust clouds beyond town. People had hunted it for days, called it cursed, dangerous, wild. Yet not once had anyone stopped long enough to ask why it kept circling the valley instead of leaving. Cole removed his hat slowly while the remaining townsfolk stared toward the plains in silence. "That horse just saved every ranch in Dry Creek," Deputy Harris said quietly. Nobody argued with him. Then old Samuel Pike stepped forward from beside the feed store. Nearly 70 years old and half blind in one eye, Samuel had lived in the valley longer than anyone alive. He looked toward Evelyn with an expression she could not read. "I remember that brand," he said softly. "Mercer used to train supply horses different from everybody else. Smarter, loyal." He paused before continuing. "Your husband worked closest with them." Evelyn looked down at the muddy street beneath her boots. Samuel's voice lowered further. "Thomas once spent 2 straight days calming a shipment horse trapped during a canyon storm. Refused to leave it behind." Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes toward the distant dust clouds where the stallion had vanished. A cold breeze moved through town carrying the smell of burned hay and dry grass. Then Samuel spoke one final sentence that settled over Dry Creek heavier than smoke. "Sometimes animals remember kindness longer than people do." By late afternoon, Dry Creek no longer sounded like a frightened town. It sounded confused. Ranchers gathered outside the saloon speaking in low voices while children pointed toward the southern plains, where the last of the cattle had finally settled near the foothills. Smoke from the burned hay barns still drifted through the valley, but now another story spread faster than the fire itself. The black stallion had saved the herd. Some people refused to believe it. Others swore they saw the animal guiding cattle better than trained ranch horses. But nobody argued about one thing anymore. The horse could have abandoned the valley days ago. Instead, it stayed. Evelyn Carter stood quietly near the water trough outside the general store while men argued around her like distant thunder. She did not join the conversation. She simply listened. "Maybe it was luck," one rancher muttered. "No horse thinks like that." "Then why did it avoid Raven Wash?" another answered. "Even our own riders nearly missed it." Cole Braddock leaned against a hitching post nearby, unusually silent beneath the brim of his hat. He looked exhausted now more than angry. The valley had almost lost 200 head of cattle before sunrise. Men remembered things like that, especially when survival arrived from the last place they expected. Deputy Harris approached Evelyn carrying a folded blanket over one arm. Thought you might need this, he said quietly. Temperature is dropping fast tonight. Evelyn accepted the blanket with a small nod. Thank you. Harris hesitated before speaking again. Truth is, I think the horse only listens to you. Evelyn looked toward the plains beyond town, where golden evening light stretched across the hills. No, she answered softly. I think it stopped listening to everybody else. Harris frowned slightly as if trying to understand what she meant. Before he could answer, sudden shouting erupted near the edge of town. Several ranch hands came galloping down the north road covered in dust, horses breathing hard beneath them. Fire near Blackstone Ridge, one of them shouted. Grass caught from the old lightning strike. The mood in Dry Creek changed instantly. Wind had picked up again during the afternoon. Dry grass across the northern hills could turn into a wall of flame before nightfall if conditions worsened. Ranchers immediately scrambled toward the stables. Buckets, shovels, water wagons. The familiar panic of western summers returned in seconds. Evelyn felt cold unease settle into her stomach. Blackstone Ridge sat directly above the narrow canyon trails leading towards several ranches and homesteads. If fire blocked those paths after dark, families could become trapped before morning. Then she noticed something strange. Every horse in town suddenly became restless at the exact same moment. Heads lifting, ears turning north, listening. A distant sound rolled faintly through the evening air. Hoofbeats. Fast. People turned toward the northern hills just as a dark shape burst across the ridge line against the setting sun. The stallion. Dust exploded behind it, while the animal raced down the slope with terrifying speed, mane whipping through the wind like black smoke. But it was not running blindly. It kept stopping every few hundred yards, turning sharply back toward the ridge as if trying to lead attention somewhere. What is it doing now? Somebody whispered. Evelyn narrowed her eyes toward the hills. Then she saw it. Thin gray smoke rising behind the ridge faster than before. The horse was not fleeing the fire. It was warning the town before the flames reached the canyon trails. Cole Braddock stared toward the ridge in stunned silence before finally speaking the one sentence nobody expected from him. Saddle every horse we have, he said quietly. And somebody follow that stallion. The ride to Blackstone Ridge began under a sky the color of dying embers. Wind swept across Dry Creek Valley carrying ash and the sharp smell of burning grass through every canyon trail leading north. Ranchers pushed their horses hard through the darkening hills while wagon wheels rattled behind them loaded with water barrels, blankets, and tools. But no rider moved faster than the black stallion. It stayed ahead of the group the entire climb, appearing and disappearing through smoke, like something born from the fire itself. Every few minutes the horse stopped along the trail and looked back toward the riders as if checking whether they were still following. Evelyn Carter rode beside Deputy Harris in the supply wagon, gripping the wooden rail tighter every mile they climbed. She had not traveled these canyon roads since Thomas died. Too many memories lived up there among the rocks and narrow passes. But tonight the valley needed every hand willing to help. Flames appeared just beyond the ridge before they reached the top. Long lines of orange crawling through dry grass beneath heavy smoke clouds. Ranchers immediately spread across the hills trying to contain the fire before shifting wind trapped nearby homesteads. Shouting echoed through the canyon while horses stomped nervously against glowing ash beneath their hooves. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon slowly, coughing as smoke drifted across the ridge. Then she noticed the stallion standing perfectly still near the edge of the cliffs overlooking Blackstone Pass. Not panicked. Watching. The same way it watched the valley. What is it looking at? Harris muttered beside her. Evelyn followed the horse's gaze down toward the narrow canyon trail below. At first she saw only smoke and darkness gathering between the rocks. Then movement. A wagon. One small ranch wagon struggling through the pass nearly half a mile below. Two frightened horses pulled it unevenly while sparks drifted through the dry brush surrounding the trail. There is somebody down there, Evelyn whispered. Cole Braddock rode over immediately after hearing her voice. He narrowed his eyes through the smoke. The Dawson family, he muttered. They live east of the ridge. Another gust of wind swept flames dangerously close to the canyon walls below. The narrow trail would not stay open much longer. We cannot get a wagon team through there fast enough, one rancher said grimly. Trail is too tight. The stallion suddenly moved before anyone else could speak. It raced down the slope toward the canyon path without hesitation, sliding through smoke and ash beneath the darkening sky. Evelyn watched in disbelief as the horse disappeared toward the trapped wagon below. Then she remembered Thomas again. One sentence, one quiet truth he repeated every spring during fire season. Horses know the land better than maps ever will. Evelyn grabbed the nearest saddle horse before fear could stop her. Cole looked stunned. "Miss Carter, where are you going?" She swung herself awkwardly into the saddle, nearly losing balance for a moment after so many years away from horseback. Her hands shook against the reins, but not enough to climb back down. "That horse is trying to show us a safer trail," she answered quietly. Cole stared at her as smoke rolled across the ridge behind them. Then, without another word, he mounted his own horse beside her. Together they followed the black stallion into the smoke-covered canyon while firelight flickered across the rocks like restless ghosts from the past. Smoke swallowed the canyon so thick that Evelyn Carter could barely see the horse she was riding beneath her. Ash drifted through the air like gray snow while fire crackled somewhere beyond the cliffs above Blackstone Pass. Every breath tasted like dust and burned cedar. But ahead of them, the black stallion kept moving without hesitation, weaving through narrow rock paths hidden beneath shadows and smoke. It never looked lost. Not once. Cole Braddock rode beside Evelyn now, his usual hard expression replaced by something closer to disbelief. "That trail dead ends near the old mining cut," he shouted over the wind. But the stallion ignored the main path completely and slipped between two narrow stone walls nearly invisible beneath the smoke. Evelyn's horse hesitated immediately. "Come on," she whispered, steadying the frightened animal beneath her trembling hands. The canyon passage tightened around them until sparks bounced off the rocks on both sides. Somewhere below, the frightened cries of the Dawson horses echoed through the smoke. They were close now, very close. Then the narrow passage suddenly opened onto a hidden ledge overlooking Blackstone Pass from above. Evelyn froze at the sight below her. The Dawson wagon sat trapped beside fallen debris near the lower trail, while smoke rolled through the canyon floor in thick waves. Mr. Dawson struggled with the terrified horses while his wife held two children tightly in the back of the wagon beneath a soaked blanket. Flames crawled closer through dry brush surrounding the trail. Cole cursed softly under his breath. "They are boxed in." But before panic could settle over the ledge, the black stallion moved again. It climbed down the steep ridge toward the trapped wagon using a narrow descent path no wagon rider would ever notice from below. Evelyn stared after it in stunned silence. "How does it know these trails?" Cole whispered. Then memory struck her all at once. Thomas. The Mercer routes. The old supply horses trained through canyon shortcuts before the company collapsed years ago. This horse had traveled these passes long before Dry Creek forgot them existed. "Follow it," Evelyn said immediately. Cole looked toward her sharply. "Are you sure?" Evelyn tightened her grip on the reins despite the fear hammering inside her chest. "That horse has not led us wrong once." They descended carefully behind the stallion, while ash swirled through the darkening canyon around them. Below, the Dawson children spotted the black horse first. One little girl pointed through the smoke just as the stallion emerged beside the trapped wagon. Strangely, the frightened team horses calmed almost instantly at its presence. Their panicked movements slowed. Breathing steadied, like they trusted it. Cole reached the wagon minutes later with two other ranchers close behind. Together they cleared enough debris for the wagon to move again, while Evelyn stayed near the horses, speaking softly to keep them calm as sparks drifted across the trail. Then came the sound nobody wanted to hear. Wind shifting. Flames roared louder above the canyon walls. Fire was moving faster now. "We have to go," somebody shouted through the smoke. The problem was the lower trail back toward Dry Creek had nearly disappeared beneath smoke and falling ash. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Horses became restless again. Children cried inside the wagon. Then the black stallion stepped forward into the center of the trail and looked back directly at Evelyn Carter, waiting, like it already knew the way home. The black stallion moved through the smoke without fear, its dark shape barely visible beneath drifting ash and flickering orange light. Evelyn Carter guided her horse behind it, while the Dawson wagon followed close beside. Cole Braddock and the other riders. Fire crackled somewhere above the canyon walls now, louder than before, carried by fierce mountain winds sweeping through Blackstone Pass. Every few seconds sparks spiraled down around them like burning snow. The trail beneath the wagon wheels narrowed dangerously near the cliff edge. One frightened movement from the horses, and everything could collapse into panic again. But each time the Dawson team began to panic, the black stallion slowed just enough for them to see it ahead. Calm returned almost instantly, like the animal carried silence with it through the fire. Evelyn could barely believe what she was witnessing. Her own horse followed the stallion naturally now without resistance, trusting each turn through the hidden canyon paths. The same hidden routes Thomas once described beside quiet campfires long ago. Old Mercer supply trails forgotten after the company vanished from the territory. This pass should not connect back to Dry Creek, Cole shouted through the smoke. Evelyn looked ahead toward the stallion weaving between rock walls blackened by ash. Maybe most people stopped using it, she answered. But the horses never forgot. Wind roared suddenly through the canyon behind them. Someone shouted. Evelyn turned just in time to see flames sweeping across the upper ridge where they had stood minutes earlier. Fire rolled through dry brush with terrifying speed, swallowing the main trail leading back toward town. If they had stayed there longer, the Dawson family would have been trapped completely. Even Cole looked shaken now. That horse saved us again, Deputy Harris muttered from behind the wagon. Nobody disagreed. The canyon path finally widened near a shallow creek bed hidden beneath the rocks. Smoke thinned enough for moonlight to break through overhead, while exhausted horses lowered their heads toward the water. The black stallion stopped at the edge of the creek and looked back toward the group one final time. Then, for the first time all night, it seemed tired. Truly tired. Ash covered its dark coat. Steam rose from its body into the cold night air. Evelyn slowly climbed down from her saddle and approached, carefully through the shallow water. The stallion did not move away. It simply stood there breathing heavily while creek water flowed around its legs beneath the moonlight. Evelyn reached up gently and brushed ash from the scarred brand beneath its mane. You carried all this alone for years, did you not? She whispered. The horse lowered its head slightly beside her shoulder. Cole removed his gloves slowly nearby, staring at the scene in silence. Then he finally spoke with a voice quieter than she had ever heard from him before. I spent a week trying to chase that animal out of this valley. He looked toward the burned ridge behind them. Turns out it was the only thing protecting it. Nobody answered right away. The creek moved softly over stone while smoke drifted across the moonlit canyon. Then little Anna Dawson climbed carefully from the wagon, clutching a soot-covered blanket around her shoulders. She walked directly toward the black stallion without fear and held out one tiny hand. Every rancher watching held their breath. The stallion lowered its head gently toward the little girl until she touched the side of its face beneath the moonlight. And in that quiet moment beside the creek, Dry Creek Valley finally stopped seeing a monster. Morning returned slowly to Dry Creek Valley the next day. Smoke still lingered along the northern ridges, drifting through the pine trees in thin gray ribbons beneath pale sunlight, but the fire had finally lost its strength during the night. The town survived. So did the ranches. And for the first time in nearly a week, the valley sounded peaceful again. No warning bells. No frightened cattle. No angry shouting outside the saloon. Only wind moving softly across open grass and the distant creak of wagons returning home. Evelyn Carter stood outside her cabin watching the sunrise spill gold across the canyon walls while a coffee pot warmed slowly over the stove behind her. The black stallion rested quietly beneath the cottonwood tree near her porch, its dark coat glowing faintly beneath the morning light. The old wool blanket still covered part of its back. Sometime during the night, the horse had finally allowed itself to sleep. Real sleep. Deep enough that it no longer lifted its head at every sound in the valley. Evelyn noticed the difference immediately. Trust changed living things. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. Hoofbeats echoed up the canyon road shortly after sunrise. Evelyn looked down the trail expecting trouble out of habit. Instead, she saw nearly half the town riding toward her cabin. Cole Braddock in front. Deputy Harris beside him. Families followed behind carrying baskets, lumber, feed sacks, and fresh water barrels tied behind their horses. Even old Samuel Pike came riding slowly in the back beneath his weathered hat. The stallion lifted its head beneath the tree but did not run. Cole stopped his horse near the porch and removed his hat quietly. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the proudest rancher in Dry Creek finally cleared his throat. "We came to repair your fence," he said awkwardly. "And the Dawson family insisted you take these supplies." Evelyn glanced behind him, where little Anna Dawson smiled shyly from the wagon seat, clutching a bundle of apples against her chest. More riders stepped forward carrying tools and lumber. One woman offered blankets. Another brought fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Small things